I moved away from my home state almost a year ago. Between then and now, I've gone back to visit once, and I stayed where my sister, Em, was staying at the time. I got involved with a friend, John, years prior. Em had been staying with him as per my recommendation. The rent was cheap, and she was allowed to do what she wanted. At this point in my life, I had just become religious, and I also felt as though my spiritual senses had become more refined after a baptism. I led my life with logic, so naturally, I was not a believer of the paranormal before this. It started out small. Whenever I was home, I'd hear knocking on the wall that separated my room from my sister's. They started soft, but would get louder as my stay unfolded. One night, they were loud enough to make me think someone was knocking at the door all the way downstairs. When I went to answer, nobody was there. I usually chalked this up to ding-dong ditches or someone being impatient. I began hearing shuffling or thumping in her room as well. There was a cat that enjoyed getting into her room, so after plenty of these noises, I decided to block off the door with something heavy. It didn't latch shut. As I was home alone again going into the night, I heard more noises and got up to see if the cat somehow got into the room. The barricade I had placed was not moved, and the door was tightly shut. One night, as I lay to sleep, I heard another loud knock. This time, it was in a very common rhythm that I heard all over the place. The beat was often used as a form of communication or as an attention getter for most people. There's usually a string of them, then a pause, waiting for the last two beats from the recipient of the first ones. This would tell someone you're there in response. I thought it was the door, but nobody was there. I came back upstairs to hear a loud thud come from my sister's room again. Nothing was in there, cat was asleep. One day, when John wasn't working, I came out of my room to speak to him. I couldn't find him anywhere, so I checked my sister's room and thought I saw his forearm wrapped around a giant teddy bear on her bed. The teddy bear blocked the rest of his body. His arms were pale with scars and veins, very easy to recognize for me. I decided to let him sleep. Later, I heard the door open and close. He had just come in from shopping. I asked him why he was sleeping on my sister's bed instead of the couch, and he gave me a strange look, assuring me he had never done that before. He had gone shopping before I woke up that morning and hadn't been home since. I went for a night walk, which I love, and later came back and hung out with John. He asked me if I knocked on the door to play a joke on him. He demonstrated the same beat that I had heard while I was alone, but I never told him about the knocking. Another day, he asked me why I stared at him through my sister's window when he was parked outside. He described me wearing a black bra and no top, but I didn't even pack a black bra with me. Any bras I did have were light in colour. Later, he told me of a figure hanging onto the side of a truck that was driving down the road next to the house. It was apparently adorned in black cloth, and he couldn't see any feet on it. It was hooded, and the cloth looked like silky see-through material. He said after the truck passed by a telephone pole, the figure had disappeared. After each occurrence in the home, we looked for intruders, but never found any. Going into that room alone gave me a strong sense of dread and threat at times, to the point where I'd lose focus and forget what I went into the room for. My sister was rarely ever there. The house was previously a drug house. Ever since, I've been experiencing things going missing. Putrid smells, cold gusts, noises, and even felt as though I was bitten on my stomach as I was trying to sleep. I feel as though someone is standing in my peripheral staring at me. I feel their eyes, but when I look, there's nobody there. Does anyone have advice, information, theories as to what's going on? I can't explain many of the things that went on, and I was bitten on the stomach last night. I'm getting uncomfortable. So my family owns some property down at the lake for camping that's completely gated. The gate is old and very loud, so no person or animal could open it or climb it without being heard. There's also little rocks all around the tents, so no one can walk around the property without being heard, as there's always a loud crunch to their steps. My friend, same one from the other stories. I'm surprised she still came over a lot after everything. She doesn't anymore, now we always hang at her house. And my little sister decided that they wanted to go camping down at the lake. I don't know why the hell we decided to do that after everything, but we did. The lake also has no Wi-Fi or phone service, so we downloaded a couple movies on my friend's phone to watch. We drove down to the lake and parked on the other side of the gate because vehicles can't really fit well on the actual property. While we were closing the gate behind us, we noticed someone walking across the street from us. It's not unusual for people to take walks around the lake. We actually see it a lot round here. But this person had a strange vibe, and I think my friend and sister noticed it too, because they quickly shut the gate and asked if I had brought my protection crystals. I have a few and usually keep them under my pillow, but this time I laid them around the inside of the tent. Around midnight, we were still watching movies when there was a very loud sound right next to my head from outside the tent. It was a sound I had never really heard before, and the best way I can describe it was a growl. My friend quickly paused the movie, and everything went quiet and still. We had some lanterns on in the tent, but everyone was too scared to move to grab them. We waited a moment, and we heard the growl again. I slowly started to sit up as my friend and sister started to look at me. I could tell they wanted to start yelling and calling for help to our neighbours, who happened to be camping right next door. I shook my head at them and whispered them to be quiet and still, because I had no idea what was outside the tent. We get cougars around here, but only very rarely, but this didn't sound anything like a cougar. We heard whatever was outside start to circle around the tent, and my friend whispered to me to call for help. I told her no again, and that we needed to be quiet. So she grabbed my sister's hand, and they started quietly praying. Again, my friend is not religious, but she always ended up praying while she was with us. My sister took her phone out and slowly started to crawl around the tent in hopes of finding a spot that gave her some service. As she was doing this, whatever was outside started to press against the tent, as if to see how much strength it would take to get into it. My sister managed to get the tiniest bit of service on her phone and started texting our parents, friends and sister to get someone to come visit us, but no one replied. Eventually, one of her friends ended up responding and called our parents, but they didn't pick up, so they called our older sister and she thankfully did pick up. My sister's friend texted us shortly after and told us that our sister was on her way to come get us. We heard whatever was outside find the entrance to the tent. Our tent actually had 2 zippers to get inside. One was into a netted screen, and the other was to get into the actual tent. It started fumbling around with the zipper as my older sister's car pulled up. The headlights shone through the tent, but there was no shadow on the other side. It was like whatever was there had disappeared. We heard my older sister open the gate, and we immediately exited the tent and ran to her in the car, and she drove away as quickly as she could. When we got home, we all started discussing what happened, and apparently no one had heard anything open or climb the gate, nor had anyone heard anything walking towards the tent before the growling noise, and no one saw or heard it leave when my sister pulled up. We also talked about the person we had seen before we closed the gate, and it turns out we all saw something different. My friend had seen a short man with short hair. I had seen a tall woman with long hair. My sister said she couldn't make out what she had seen. This could have just been our minds remembering it wrong because of what had happened after that, but I personally don't think it was. The next day we went back to the lake to collect everything we had left behind in our hurry to get away. Our phones, crystals, etc. We decided to check around the tent for any footprints that might have been left. There were bare human footprints going all the way around the tent, but there were none heading towards or leading away from the tent. It was as if whatever it was had just appeared and disappeared. We also had left a ton of snacks out on the table that was a good distance away from the tent. Any animal that managed to get inside the property would have gone for the food and tried to avoid the humans. But this thing went straight for the tent with people in it. The food was perfectly untouched the next day. My sister and I don't camp anymore, and anytime my parents have friends with kids over to camp, my sister and I take the kids to the house to sleep because we're always worried whatever was outside our tent will come back. Six or 7 years ago, I was invited to go camping with a group of guys. I had no idea what the plan they had for this trip. This was my first excursion camping, so I was good to go with nearly anything. I should also mention, this was in mid-January in Ohio, when this all went down. So we get down to the location, and we set up our tents. The main guy of the group, Andy, built this tarp house with propane heaters for us all to hang out in. We're all in there drinking a little, sharing some weird stories. Somehow we get on the subject of the Regans. But that soon passes and a guy named Joe starts up about a ghost town nearby named Circleville that's supposedly about 3 miles away from where we are camping. Turns out this was a ploy to test me and see if I can hang out with these guys. Whatever, I've been to war. I'm sure I can handle what goofy shit they may throw at me. As a bonus, I'm a big horror fan and have been interested in the paranormal and supernatural stuff from a young age, so I was good to go. Or so I thought. We finish our bowl sesh, we go to our respective tents and go to sleep. The next morning is the day we're meant to hike to Circleville. We bundle up, grab a few things that may help with our hike, and then we drive to a trail that's meant to lead to Circleville. I'm asking questions about the town, like, why is it a ghost town? Why and how is it haunted? When we get there, should we play Turn Me On, Mr. Deadman? Let me say, no one appreciated the last question. I was disappointed. Anyway, we get to this trail and start our hike. Before long, we reach this small river we have to cross. Luckily, there was a fallen tree we could cross over to the other side. Spirits are high and we're fairly excited to see this ghost town. We keep hiking and come across some railroad tracks and start walking on those, assuming they'd lead to Circleville, since there's supposed to be a haunted railway tunnel that leads into the town. I wasn't with the best navigators. 3 miles comes and goes. We're getting cold, worn out, so we stop and discuss what's going on. We decide to turn back and head to camp. After this decision, we hear a faint train whistle, so we get off the tracks and walk near them to the side. A good while passes and we see no train, but continue to hear a faint train whistle. We chalk it up as maybe the wind and our minds toying with us. We continue on the same way we came. We get to that same river, yet the tree that was fallen over before is no longer there. Also found that odd, but thought, maybe it was moved because it wasn't safe. Who knows? So we find a narrowing and cross on foot. As we cross, we see a lady floating down this river. Again, mind you, this is mid-January. No one in their right mind would be doing this. That spooks us a little bit, but we continue on. We finally get back to camp without incident. Warm up in the propane heater tent thing. A few minutes pass, and we hear giggling. We send Joe out to see if anyone is nearby. No one, not a soul. The closest campers were about half a mile or so away down a hill. As the night passes, we hear the giggling a few more times. For fun, we share goofy ghost stories to help our minds rest. After we eat, we decide to go to sleep. Now this is where it starts to get even weirder. We all experience things that night, but we all have one thing in common through the tales. This common thread was a dream of a sign that read Circleville half mile. We share our tales in the morning to each other. One was stalked by an unseen thing, the other haunted by the lady in the river. I had a dream, so I thought, was walking into an old church, and as I did, everyone in the church turned to me and looked as if they'd been decaying. As the day goes on, we all feel as if we are being watched and followed. Every so often, we'd see something out the corner of our eyes in the woods that surrounded our campsite. We get a little worried, but think we can hold them off if anything happens. Oddly, at this campsite, there was little to no cell reception, so if shot were to go to full-blown bananas, we could call for any emergency service. In the propane tent again, we think of how we're all feeling the sense of being watched and followed. We start to throw out all kinds of ideas out there. Like, did we step into a similar but different dimension while on our hike? Did we actually make it to Circleville? And what we saw was too traumatizing and our brains are playing tricks on us? Maybe that lady in the river was a witch. Who knows? We thought of all kinds of whacked out scenarios as to why this may be. That night, it got ungodly cold, so I decided to sleep in my car. Sometime in the night, I feel my car shaking, so I wake up and look around. I don't seem to see anything, so I go back to sleep. A little while later, I hear muttering outside my car and feel the car shake again. I think it's the guys at this point, and I say, haha, real funny, now stop it. It does temporarily. At this time, I'm pissed. I wake up and see my car surrounded by 5 people. Same people I saw from my dream the other night in the church. They're glaring at me, and all of a sudden, the door where I was resting my head flies open, and I'm pushed out of the car to the ground. I hear footsteps coming over to me, and those same 5 people combine into one large, lovely transparent mass with glowing eyes. I'm stiff, both due to being cold and a little in fear. It crouches down and simply says, "You were so close," and then just disappears. What the hell does that mean? The next morning, I'm freaking out, telling the other guys what happened. Gary, another guy there, mentions, "That's weird. I heard something like that last night and saw shadows on the tent walls, but assumed it was the other guys." At this point, we quickly pack up our shit, let out the fire we started, and start to head home. Before we leave the area we camped out, at least I see that large figure again as we leave. And like in the dreams, as we head home, we see that street sign, Circleville, half mile. What the shit? What the hell happened those few nights? To this day, when we discuss it, no logical conclusion can be come up with. It's odd that 5 grown-ass men have the same experience, or similar, at least involving one thing. What do you think this might have been?
This story took place in the winter of 1997. Me and my friend, who I'll call Will, were camping in Zion National Park, Utah. I'm not sure whether or not camping was legal at the time, as we were both from Maine. We're both devout Mormons, so we were visiting the area to connect to other like-minded people. We first went to the park sometime in the middle of January, so the weather was very frigid. We decided to make a camp in a small clearing somewhere near the Great Staircase. We set a small tent up underneath a few trees. Things went fine for the first few nights. On the 3rd morning, Will woke up in a cold sweat in the wee hours. He had had a vivid nightmare of a creature with matte black eyes following him through the canyon. We brushed it off as just that, a nightmare. Later that morning, we went up the ridge and to do some sightseeing. Will was eerily quiet. I asked him if he was all right, and he told me he had been to this part of the park before. Neither of us had been here in the days prior, and he realized he had seen it in his dream. We were both spooked, but brushed it off as a coincidence. We went back to camp later that afternoon, and we thought nothing of the coincidence from earlier. That night, when we went to cook up some of the hot dogs we'd brought along with us, we searched and searched for them, but they were all but missing. Once again, we just assumed we mustn't have packed them, but Will was certain he saw them earlier that day. We decided not to worry about it, and we ate some protein bars we had packed for hiking. Things went fine for the rest of the night, but we couldn't help but feel there was something wrong. 2 days later, Will woke up in the night again. This time was different though. His nose was bleeding, thick black blood, and his shirt was covered in dirt and mud. One other minor detail I forgot to mention is he woke up 2 miles from the tent. I only found him because I heard him screaming from out in the bush. I went and found him and helped get back home to camp. When we returned, we found a small bird skull on top of Will's bedroll. The howls of the coyotes and other similar creatures we had heard in the nights prior were non-existent, leaving the canyon strangely silent. Later that day, we went out for another hike. We were about 8 miles from our camp at this point, and being that it was the days before cell phones and we were in a canyon, there was no way we could contact for help if we got lost or injured. Our car was at least a 6-hour hike from where we were camping. We happened upon a small clearing, and at the edge of the tree line we found a small cave. Being the naive, curious young boys we were, we ventured out in search of an adventure. Inside the cave, there was no sound but the echoes of our footsteps. The ground was strewn with bones of small birds, not dissimilar to the skull we found on Will's bedroll. Will went to inspect on one of the skulls. However, upon picking it up, we both had an overwhelming sense of dread filling us both. Our ears began to ring intensely, and our heads began to vibrate violently. The sound was like static from a radio, and it caused us both an immediate, terrible headache. I screamed at Will. We needed to leave, but he couldn't hear me over the static ringing. I couldn't even hear myself. I grabbed his arm, and we ran for the mouth of the cave. We decided we'd had enough, and we were going to leave. The ringing subsided as we got further from the cave. However, as we neared the camp, the sense of dread became even stronger. The camp had been destroyed. Our equipment was left dangling from trees. We tried to collect our things, but we were too overcome with fear. We didn't hesitate. We picked up what things of value we could carry, and we began the long walk back to my car. It was about 5 p.m. by that point, and if we started walking now, we'd be back in the car by about 11. We trekked back with no issue for about 2 hours. By 7 p.m, it was pitch black and there was no light, except for Will's lighter. The forest was suddenly filled with the sounds of hundreds of creatures howling and crying. We could make out the silhouettes of several tall deer along one of the high cliff faces. The deer looked sickly, and their eyes were blacker than the sky. We tried to ignore them, but it seemed they were following us. We dropped everything and just began to run. Somehow, we made it back to the car in just a couple hours. The sounds of the forest didn't die down for the entirety of the journey. Once we got back to the car, we assumed the battery would be dead, as we had unintentionally left the car lights on for several days. Luckily, almost as if it were a miracle, the car started fine and we got out to the park without a hitch. As of writing this, it's been 23 years since this happened, but the story still haunts me. I hadn't seen Will in several years, as he had moved away to a different state. I decided to write our story in honour of his memory, as I learned this morning of his passing. He had been suffering from mild depression long before our experience, but I feel that the traumatic nature of the event only amplified his condition. To this day, I don't have a clue what it was in the park, as I've never told the story to a single person until now. Will and I never even spoke of the events after they happened, and I'd like to believe it was all just a nightmare or shared illusion, but we know it was much more than that.
This happened to me a while back, when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always like camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear in my rifle, and jumped in my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot, and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, most likely a deer, with a lame leg as it sounded like the animal was making a walking and dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go find it and put it out of its misery. Think nothing of it after that and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that even in my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep. So I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by and I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal walk and drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and stops, and I hear nothing. No breathing, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing, nothing but trees and darkness. What the fuck? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing. Just the crickets and the breeze. I decided that there were a lot of strange noises in the woods and tried to not let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I'm hearing is really what I'm hearing, or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughter from a couple other different directions, all different, and confirm that it's real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off in the air, in case they came too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night, told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the nightlight was dead quiet. Even the wind was making no noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line and saw nothing. Listened intently to my surroundings, no laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit and figuring that scared whoever off, I sat down and in my exhausted state, I fell asleep. I woke up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, grab my rifle and listen to what they're saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly, a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. Never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole day, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me, like I left all my gear in the woods that night. My best friend and I went camping. He's relatively new to the hobby, so he's been tagging along with me, as I have plenty of experience in camping and solo backpacking. I took him to a beginner-friendly backcountry camping site that I've gone to 24 times with various friends. It's important to note, I've never stayed overnight there alone. It was a quick 2-nighter, and we got incredibly lazy the second night, and didn't walk the garbage to the car. Instead, leaving it out for the 5 hours I'd be asleep, as I had to be out of the campgrounds by 6:30 for work. We slept in separate tents next to each other because of my early dismissal. I jump out of my sleep at 5 a.m. to to footsteps going past my tent left to right. I listened closely to try and identify what animal it could be, but it sounded very human. I flashed my light outside my tent, and as quick as I beamed my light, the walking stopped. I planned my light and saw nothing. More importantly, I heard nothing. No scurrying away or running, just pure silence beside the crickets. Obviously startled, I lay awake on my phone, refusing to go back to sleep. Roughly 10 minutes later, I hear someone going through the garbage. Odd, as the garbage was on the left of my tent, but never heard any other walking outside. Whatever was going through the trash was ferociously looking through it, not like an animal skimming the top and working its way down. I flash my light again and yell out, "Hey!" Again, silence. No running away. Nothing. I stayed up sitting with my light beamed outside the entire time. I didn't alert my friend because although I'm pretty creeped out, it could just be a skunk or raccoon. At first daylight, I jump out of my tent and go straight to the garbage to put everything back in. Untouched. It was exactly the way we left it. I'm frustrated, truly. I feel like my mind is playing tricks on me and I just want to pack up, leave, and give my friend the heads up of possible animals in the area before departing. As I'm packing up, I hear the car doors open and close twice, located roughly 40 to 50 yards away behind heavy tree lines. My fight or flight response kicks in, and at this point, I'm convinced someone is fucking with us, so I choose fight. I grab my axe and head over to the cars. When maybe 15 yards out, I round a corner and see my best friend walking towards me. "What the hell are you doing here?" I fell asleep in the car. "Were you walking around the campsite an hour ago?" "No, I've been in the car the whole night." "You were still at the campfire when I called it a night. When did you go to the car?" "Truthfully, I can't remember." It was at that moment the realization came over me that I was at the campsite entirely alone, being tormented by something I couldn't see or identify. A sudden chill coursed throughout my entire body. I told my friend I would explain everything later, but please pack your shit and leave with me. I went to bed back home with a nightlight on for 5 nights. I'm just now able to tell this story. I've been camping 30 or 40 times and solo backpacking 8 to 10, and never in my life have I ever experienced a night like I did that night.
This happened 2 years ago during late August of 2020. Me and a good friend of mine, we'll call him Sam, were going to do a 2-day, 1-night camping trip deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California, 40 miles north of Yosemite. We were scouting deer ahead of the season. We parked on the side of a 2-way highway, which was around 7,000 foot in elevation, and started walking straight up the mountain. We had come upon a clear, flat meadow and decided it was a good place to camp. Once we set up camp, we climbed up to about 9,000 feet and came upon another meadow. We'll call this the upper meadow. This had the most beautiful views I've ever seen of the Sierra Nevadas. At this point I was tired, and Sam wanted to explore the rest of the upper meadow. I want to say it was about 350 to 400 yards long. The grass was about waist high. We had brought a small little camping chair that fits in one of our packs. Sam wanted to explore, and I wanted to sit and see the view and eat the snack, so we decided to split up. It was about 15 minutes later when I got this weird feeling. It wasn't necessarily a scared feeling, but more than putting me on edge, it felt like something was watching us. So I decided to try and get up and try and reconnect with Sam. It took me 6 whole minutes to find him, which didn't make any sense. It was a fairly long meadow, but 6 minutes just felt too long. Something was just off about this meadow. While writing this, Sam and I both just got goosebumps looking back at that moment. For some reason, we can't remember how, but eventually we met back up and went to the top of the mountain. At this point, We decided to go to the top of the mountain, look around, and then decided to go back down. Once we had gotten back to camp, we decided to eat dinner and go to sleep around 9:30 p.m. This is where it gets interesting. Once we had gone to bed, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Animal sounds here and there, but after around 45 minutes, we both had fallen asleep. It wasn't until, I'm thinking 12:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of what I thought was a branch getting smacked against the tree. This went on for a while, and it was coming from all around. As I was laying in my sleeping bag listening to this, it suddenly stopped. Now, one thing I forgot is where we set up camp. It was next to the edge of a straight climb up a mountain. The reason I say this is that I heard and felt a sound of like running, but the thud of its footsteps sounded really heavy. The only thing I could think of during this time was, what the fuck is going on out there? And I just couldn't move. I could hear this thing running until it suddenly stopped, and then I heard it again. When I heard it run, it almost sounded like it was on two legs. This happened 4 or 5 times, and then it all stopped for good. The next morning I woke up to see if I could find anything about what happened during the night, but found nothing. It was the strangest thing. Sam didn't hear anything, so he didn't believe me at the time, but now looking back, he feels differently. I don't know what to make of this whole situation. Writing this made my blood run cold. Ever since then, I've had so many questions and no answers. I'd love feedback from all of you.
So this happened in 2013 when I was 18 years old. It was sometime in the summer. I've forgotten exactly when, but that isn't really relevant. My friend, her boyfriend, and several of his friends were going to camp out for a couple of nights in Sulphur, Oklahoma. They invited me and my boyfriend at the time to join them. Everything had been great. We had a typical summer camping experience with lots of swimming, hiking, and arguing over correctly setting up the tents during the day. Nighttime comes around, and earlier in the evening, we befriend some people camping near us and invite them over. We have a nice fire going, and we're all just sitting around shooting the shit with our new friends and a bottle of Bacardi Zombie. Around midnight, we all start to get a little restless with our campsites. Our new friends tell us we should drive out to the cliff that overlooks the town. The moon was super bright that night, and we all thought that this was a great idea. Kids, don't go hiking in the middle of the night. It's super dangerous. Also, don't drink if you're underage. I mean, you will anyway, but as a responsible adult, I have to say that. Anyway, 9 of us piled into my friend's boyfriend's truck. 6 of us in the bed of the truck, 3 in the cab. By the way, her boyfriend didn't drink, so he was definitely okay to drive. And another point I'd like to make is that I only had 1 drink this night, and at the point of our excursion, it had been a couple of hours since I'd had it. So I definitely wasn't intoxicated, and certainly not intoxicated enough to hallucinate what I saw. So where we were was a very dark rural road, headed up to this cliff area. There were a few houses up this way, but at the time, it was pretty desolate. There were also no cars except for us on this road at this time. My friend, my boyfriend, and myself were sitting on the driver's side out in the back of the truck. So we're outside enjoying the breeze. We came up to a spot on the road where we're passing a home. Again, there are some houses out here, but not a ton. And it's not a residential area, it's rural, so no streetlights. As we pass this house, I see a girl standing next to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. She's barefoot, dirty blonde hair that's just past her shoulders, light blue sundress with what appeared to be a flower print. And she's just standing there motionless and facing the road. Her face was completely expressionless. I may have thought she was a mannequin had she not just turned her head and held my gaze as we drove by, and kept staring until we were out of sight of each other. I instantly had chills head to toe and felt incredibly uneasy. She looked to be a teenager herself or a very young adult. She was alone and the house was completely dark.
No porch light or any light coming from the windows. I turned to my friend and boyfriend and asked if they had just seen what I had, and exclaimed how creepy that was. They agreed, but didn't have too much else to say. Naturally, I thought whomever lived there was not just trying to scare whoever drove by looking like a stereotypical ghost girl. But what made me so uneasy was the idea she would have just been standing out there alone, for who knows how long, all in the hopes that someone might drive by. Keep in mind, this was in the middle of the night, and we hadn't passed a single other car the whole trip up to the cliff. It just wasn't sitting right with me. We continued on and made it to the cliff and enjoyed a moonlit mini hike and enjoyed the view over this sleepy town. Without any other incidents, I might add. A few years down the line, my friend and I are having a spooky discussion, and I brought up that night. I asked her if she remembered that night and how creepy that was. She told me that she had a confession to make. She said, "You've brought that night up a few times since then, and I have to be honest, I never actually saw anyone standing there. None of us did. We actually thought you were trying to scare us, so we played along." She went on to tell me that she does remember the house in question, and she does remember the mailbox and all of that, but that there was never a person standing next to the road beside that mailbox. And everyone else in the car, they hadn't seen her either. They all thought I was full of shit and just trying to scare everyone. What the fuck did I see? I remember so many details of what she looked like, almost in a frame-by-frame sequence. I remember the uneasy feeling I got as soon as I saw her and how it felt like she was staring directly at me. At the time, I thought she was just staring at all of us, but maybe she was, in fact, only staring at me. My friend has since told me the story thoroughly creeps her out now, knowing that I was dead serious about seeing her, and I definitely wasn't fucking around. And I'm also way more creeped out now that I'm the only one who saw her. I just don't know what to think of it.
I was camping with some friends. There were 4 of us. 2 guys, 2 girls, all in their early 20s. And we were driving across the country, camping in different spots. One night, we decided to camp in some woods on a cliff by the ocean, near a very beautiful beach. After we spent the night, I wake up earlier, around 9 a.m, and decide to explore the woods. Now, for some context, I never believed in paranormal or spirits before this, and I had been camping for years, so I'm used to the woods and being alone in nature. It was a very sunny day. I have a weird feeling like something's wrong or I'm being watched, but just ignore it. After I see a trail that ends in a small circle, and find it weird that it just ends, so I follow that trail to see if there's something in the end. When I reach the end, I see in the corner of my eye a woman behind me with black hair covering her face. And I didn't just turn immediately. I waited to process the image for a few seconds and to make sure it was real and I could still see it. I turn around and there's nothing there, and I feel chills all over my body, almost like electricity. I go back to camp and get the other dude to follow me to that trail to see if he sees or feels something. He sees nothing but says the mood feels weird. We explored together and he finds something not far from that trail. A broken corner of a tombstone. The typical white one with black engraved letters, and it just says a date that by the position, it has to be the date of birth. 29th of February, no year. Now, less than 0.07% of the world's population was born on February 29th. And my friend who found the tombstone was born that day. We get freaked out, run to camp, get the girls and just drive out of there. There were no cemeteries nearby, but there was a chapel. I grew up outside of a relatively small town in Texas, and more importantly, in a haunted house. Well, to be more accurate, on haunted land. I'd like to tell a few stories as well as my own experiences. Now, a little background which gives some context to why I say land instead of just house. My childhood home sat about 100 yards off the Colorado River, on about 100 acres of land technically owned by the city. It's a public city park that lays outside of the boundaries of the city. Anyway, my father is the live-in park ranger for this city. It's not a bad gig, all things considered. Though in my opinion, he could be paid more for being a maintenance and authority figure that's on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This means if someone gets locked out, if a camping site loses power or has problems, or there's a conflict, someone's knocking at our door no matter the hour. It's always been this way since I was about 7 years old, and I'm now 29. He's a tough old man, almost 55 years old, and not all that inclined to share spooky stories of things he's seen and been told, though he does believe in ghosts. He'll try and find a rational explanation for why things happen, before he caves and admits it was a ghost. Now, I give this background because it's important to note that when things go wrong, he's usually the first person on the scene. This includes the time we had some jet skis explode while a father-daughter were riding them, alligators roll up on the campsite, personal disagreements, people trying to be sneaky and not pay by showing up after dark, people doing illegal substances or trying to get freaky in the back seat, in the rough camping part of the park, and of course, being right on the river, drownings. For some reason, people love to drink and swim, and someone drowns about every 3 years minimum. We're actually due for a drowning following the pattern. I don't hope people drown, but the memory of the last ones don't seem to stick as long as they should. Anyway, Dad is usually the first on the scene, either to try and help the people or to direct the ambulance and police, and eventually search for the bodies. Most appear after a day. One took 3 days, and Mom said that's the only time she's seen Dad truly disturbed. It's not a fun part of the job, and Dad dreads summer and spring when people start coming out and acting stupid. So, people drown, sad as it is. That being said, these drownings have led to several spirits that hang around. Our most popular one to be reported is the first man my father helped try and find the body for. He was wearing a white shirt, blue jeans, and was a friendly man by nature. Now I need you to know, I've only seen him once myself after his passing. My mother and my father have seen both him multiple times, and many campers have seen him. One gentleman who likes to fish was out late, close to midnight, returned to his car, alone as he'd been all day. He gets his gear in, gets in himself, and goes to buckle up after starting his car, only to see the smiling figure of a man in the white shirt and jeans in the passenger seat. He leapt out, and when he turned around, saw no one in his car. It's been almost 5 years, and this fisher no longer comes out by himself if he's staying after dark. Other campers have reported seeing a man sitting at a table, white shirt and jeans, who will see them and raise his hand as if to wave at them. People will wave back to realise no one is there. My mother used to work early morning shifts, 3 a.m. to 2 p.m, and she'd see him standing outside of the office on her way to work from time to time. My own experience with him is simple but spooky. I was sitting in the office with a friend one night talking, about 10:30. My parents now live above the office after Hurricane Harvey. Anyway, we were sitting there, and I saw out the window over my friend's shoulder a figure walking by the window, like it was going for a walk through the double glass doors of the office. Now I live in a park, meant for camping and visiting. However, it's important to note that the park was A, closed due to our sewer system getting redone, and B, it was the middle of the week, and most people didn't show up then. It was the man in the white shirt and jeans, and I knew that he was coming to buy something from the office. I was spooked, who wouldn't be? And my friend and I retreated upstairs rapidly. He's never been threatening, and I'm sort of glad the flood didn't take him away. However, even with him on the land, there are worse things that are here. My childhood home, which I must admit, I'm sort of still grieving and grateful I cannot live in again, was destroyed in Hurricane Harvey. It had 2 feet of water in it and emotionally devastated our family. There's something that still lives in that husk, now used for storage, and I hate it. Growing up, my bedroom was used during the day by myself and never at night. When I was little, I often had night terrors that had me shrieking for my mother and sleeping on the couch instead. She told me that I often said, "She has no face," when I asked why I was crying at night. By the time I was 9, the couch in the living room was my bed, and my bedroom held a cheap futon. The feeling of being watched, of something standing behind you, was and is overwhelming. I hated it. Even when I slept in the living room, I had to have the door to that room shut, as well as the one next to it. The feeling of being stared at was so strong. We had a door to the garage at one end of the living room, and one doorway to the kitchen. The garage door was open during the day, and there was no tangible doors to the kitchen. What I saw in these parts of the house, I can't say were human-like, but they at least wanted to be seen as it. They felt wrong, very wrong. Have you ever seen someone walk quickly by an open doorway? My mother and I saw these tall figures blur by, mostly dark, but occasionally pale. I hated seeing them. I always had this awful sense of dread and anxiety, a fear they'd not walk by the doorway, but walk into the room I was in. I think they did, more than once. I used to walk in circles in our living room while on the phone with my now platonic partner. As I'd walk by the couch, I'd feel as if something brushed against or wrapped around my ankle, and it always terrified me. I was always scared to look behind me or under the couch. As a grown woman of 20-something, I hated those things, those moments. They liked to touch my hair and ankles as I tried to sleep. And I'd say it might have been sleep paralysis, except it was only ever after I closed my eyes initially, and falling asleep was an hours-long trial. Mom often experienced seeing them and hates them too. Since Dad is on call 24/7, there are times he has to go out at night, much to our anxiety. We'd often hear the front door open and shut, or hear his voice, and call out to see what had happened or what was wrong. About half the time, he wasn't even home, and for a time, we'd write it off that we just heard things, until the dog started responding to it too. We used to have a lab mastiff mix, who would growl any time this happened and move closer to my mom like he was defending her. I've seen things dart under curtains or beneath sinks. Found drawers open and things knocked over and open that had screw-on tops or push-in tops that no one had touched in months. One time, a mounted deer head from my grandfather came off its hook and cracked me in the head. The nail it was on was unbent and undamaged, but it hurt, I assure you. Anyway, more recently, during my current visit home, Mom says that when she goes over to the house, or what used to be our house, she doesn't like going inside anymore. She says that when she takes the dogs out at night for bathroom breaks, she doesn't look in the dark windows, even if her instincts are telling her to. She's scared that if she does something, we'll be looking back at her, or feels like something is looking back at her when she does. I have these same feelings, and sometimes when I'm on doggy duty, the feeling that something is peeking over the 7-foot fence. Something opened the locked bathroom door the other night while I was visiting my parents, and an entire shelf popped off its rack in the cabinets a few weeks before that. Strange things still happen, but I'll be honest to say that I'm glad it's nothing like at the old home. These aren't the only moments I've had, which range from hearing muffled conversations for hours in the childhood home, in the dead of night, when everyone was asleep, to hearing it again at my friend's house for months and months. I've also experienced things at the high school where I teach, so I'm not sure if it's me or my life, but I'll never be persuaded the supernatural isn't real. Just down the road from where a few years ago I had previously lived, in Southeast Australia, is the opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and as we were in the area, decided to show her the woodlands while we were in the area, as she loves everything to do with nature, and it was summer, so an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees, as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the two of us just kind of sat chatting, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been put in on some plastic, and I was keeping an eye on the trees, as I had a feeling that something was just wrong. I've read that a few people have said that they felt that they were in danger, although nothing around them was off, and it was the same feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out, and my adrenaline was up there, but wasn't really anything in my eyeline that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different to before. It was only after staring into the dark that I saw that there was moonlight now lighting up the grass, where it couldn't before, as there was a black shape blocking it that before I thought was a tree. I got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it was that all sound just ceased, and everything went dead silent. And a few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path, as this thing crawled towards us on all fours. I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe. But somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but just slowly crawling forward towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it. I couldn't look away, but just as it reached the line my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto two legs and just sat staring at us. I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long that reached down near the ground. And all I could make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur on it, and in the dim light, could make out the silhouette of its head, as like a dog or wolf. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break off whatever was stopping me from thinking logically. I grabbed her by the arm and sprinted to my car, slammed the doors, and tore out of there as fast as I could. Both of us too scared to speak until about half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I imagine a rabbit sees when it catches a wolf or fox looking at it. That this is something that would be able to end us with absolute ease if it so chose. Neither of us have been able to come up with any explanation for what it was, but it's definitely changed the way I view the woods and bush. And when I go camping or hiking now, I think back to that and wonder what it was, and if I'll ever see anything like it again.
This experience happened to me a couple years ago, and I never found an explanation for it. However, my dad recently found someone on Reddit with a very similar story to mine that happened around the same time and same area. I reached out to that person, and they said I was the 5th person to reach out that has experienced something similar. So I figured I'd share my story here and see if anyone else has experienced this. Here's what happened to me 2 years ago. Some friends and I had gone camping up a canyon in Utah. This was in 2020. Some creepy stuff had happened earlier in the night before I made it to the campground. So we were trying to relax, wind down, and have some fun like we'd planned. We were in high school at this point, so we were doing stupid games like Truth or Dare and whatnot. It was me, 4 friends, and our friend's dog. There was only one other group somewhat close to us, a couple and their dog, who set up their tent a few yards away from us. They weren't close enough to interact with us at all. My friends and I were staying up and talking and laughing, etc., when at some point it sounded like someone's car alarm went off, maybe 5 or 10 miles up the canyon. The next campsite was pretty far away from ours. We didn't question the sound and went about talking, until we noticed that the sound had gotten noticeably closer. It happened gradually, so we didn't notice until it sounded like it was just a few yards away. The noisier we were, the closer it would get to us. As we whispered amongst ourselves about what could be making the sound, it came closer and closer. Finally, the noise was literally just outside our tent, mere inches away from us.
None of us dared speak or move an inch, in fear of compromising our safety. When we became quiet, so did the noise. After we were dead silent for a few minutes, the noise started up again and began to once again grow further away, until it sounded like it was 10 miles away again. This happened in the span of 10 or 20 seconds. As the night went on, we would hear the noise travel around from campsite to campsite in almost no time at all. It didn't go away until about 3 a.m. We tried to stay quiet for the rest of the night. Now, whatever made the sound travelled the span of roughly 5 to 10 miles in 5 to 10 minutes. That's a whole mile per minute. It wasn't a vehicle because there were no engine sounds with it and no headlights. It wasn't a human because there was not a single footstep or twig crunch, even when it was right outside of our tent. It made zero noise aside from the beeping. It didn't sound like any animal any of us knew about, and it travelled way too fast and was much too loud to be any animal. Here's some other important details. We originally thought the sound was either a vehicle or a machine of some kind because of the consistent pattern of the beeping. However, when we stopped to listen to it for a while, there was a brief moment when the pattern got slightly off tempo, but it sounded accidental and quickly got back to the beat afterwards. This led us to believe that something was imitating the sound of a machine or vehicle. We considered everything from nocturnal birds to pranksters with an air horn. Nothing added up. We ended up waking up the next morning at 5 a.m. to pack up and leave. The other campers, who were sleeping a few yards away from us, were already completely gone by the time we were getting up. This leads us to believe that whatever was messing with us that night had messed with them pretty bad too. I wish we could have seen our friend's dog's reaction to what happened, but he had already fallen asleep by 8 or 9 p.m, long before the beeping started. I recently got together with those same friends that I camped with back then and brought up what happened that night. One of my friends said that when the rest of us fell asleep, the same thing happened again. But instead of a car alarm, the sound was a baby crying, travelling at the same speed and distance as before. And according to her, it circled our tent a few times before fading again. The people camping closest to us did not have a baby. Not 100% about this detail, because I don't remember her telling us about it up until last week, and the experience happened 2 years ago, so it may have been a misremembered detail. But then again, I was asleep when it supposedly happened. Another notable detail is that we were less than 50 miles away from Skinwalker Ranch. Anyone have any ideas of what this could be? Or who have had similar experiences? Anything will help.
We met Pop sometime in 1999 when he started staying with our POS friend and now ex-wife. Pop was on disability, former Navy, had diabetes, and needed a double lung transplant. He was also an old school sheetrock man, like from back in the beginning, like my stepfather-in-law. Hubby learned from stepfather-in-law, so we own a sheetrock and construction business. When Hubby learned of this, he invited Pop to come to work with him. You know, give him something to do during the day. They clicked right away. He was old, set in his ways, and stubborn as hell. In the beginning of 2000, Hubby and I had split up for a few weeks. It was all BS. The kids and I went into hiding because of a dirty cop and CPS threats. During these few weeks, Hubby learned how he was being treated. He didn't like it at all. He called me and let me know what was going on. He said he was going to go get him. He was bringing him home. Pop didn't hesitate to grab his things, which wasn't much, and come home with Hubby. His own family disowned him. He saw what Hubby was going through, being separated from us, but Pop kept saying, "Don't worry, son. Our girl is coming home. She's been cautious. She'll be home soon." He said this was because we reminded him of him and his third wife, the love of his life. The day I decided to come back out of hiding, I told no one but my mom and my aunt. I knew where they were working, so I made the over 2.5 hour trip. Hubby told me Pop kept looking out the window. He asked Pop what he was doing. Pop told him, "Today's the day. Our girl's coming home for good."
I pulled up at the job site and Pop called him to the window. See, I told you, she was coming home. How Pop knew, I'll never know. He and I had a crazy connection, as he did with my hubby. They loaded up the work van and we headed home. We live in rural Alabama, close to the Cahaba River. Every year around Mother's Day, the river lilies start to bloom. Every year, he and his third wife would go and see them. They'd hang out and fish. He loved being on that river. He and our son would go camp there on the weekends. Well, that turned into a family thing for us. He had always talked about going camping. So we went and bought all the camp equipment we needed. When we do something, we're a go big or go home kind of people. We still camp, the hubby and I, to this day. I took over his medical care. Doctor's appointments. I was there in the room with him. The doctor asked him once if he was taking his meds and checking his sugar levels. He said right in front of me, "My granddaughter's doing all that. It's like living full time with a Marine drill sergeant. If she says do it, well, you better do it. She knows what she's doing." Pop would tell everyone that he had finally found his granddaughter. He'd go on and on about the kids. He asked me once if we were related. He even asked my mom when she came to visit. He'd tell me when we would talk there was something otherworldly about me. I'd joke about how I'm the granddaughter of the witch they couldn't burn. He would laugh and said he believed it. In the fall of 2000, he started going downhill quickly. Dementia was starting to set in, so he couldn't go to work with my hubby. I had to call rescue out a few times, but he refused transport to the hospital, saying I could take care of him. His faith in me was overwhelming at times. So one day in December, it was just Pop, our youngest at the time Boo Buggy, and I at the house. Everything seemed fine. Boo Buggy told him they were going to watch 101 Dalmatians. He said, "Okay, that's our morning movie today." They both settled on the couch next to each other. Like I said, nothing seemed out of place. He was in his right mind, a normal day. Sometime a bit later, he said he was tired and was going to take a nap. Not long after, Boo Buggy came into the kitchen and said, "Mama, Papa fell over." I ran to check on him. There was no pulse. I got him to the floor and started CPR. I had no phone at the time, so I grabbed Boo Buggy and ran to the neighbour's house to get them to call. Her hubby came back to my house and she kept Boo Buggy. We started CPR again and rescue showed up. It was too late. He was gone. The medical examiner told me there was nothing that could be done. It was a pulmonary embolism. We still go camping, and I know he tags along with us. After we passed, I would hear footsteps in the trailer at night. He'd check on the kids, and he'd get up to use the bathroom or something. Even after we moved into the new house, I would hear footsteps going from room to room. I knew it wasn't the kids. Each one had a distinct one. I'd get up to check. There he was, going from room to room. I invited him to continue to live with us as long as he wanted. We now have him, plus a few other family members and friends who have passed living with us. I could go on forever about how he was an amazing man and grandpa. His antics haven't stopped either, still keeping me on my toes.